Good morning, everyone. All right, we're going to get started here in just a moment. We'll give everyone another minute or so just to join our session. I know quite a few folks are just wrapping up with the keynote speech with Joe. So we'll get started here in just another minute or so. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy Roth. I am the Vice President of Professional Services with Jonas Club Software. With me today, I've got my colleague, Greg Archibald. He's our implementation specialist with Jonas Club Software. And the two of us will be your hosts for today's webinar. And we look forward to sharing with all of you some of the best practices, maybe a couple of tips and tricks along the way on how to efficiently and adequately maintain your Jonas Club management and Jonas activity management system. And really what we're going to do for this morning's session is really focus in on those areas specific to your retail operations. So we've got a couple of different sessions lined up for today, as well as for next Monday. Again, focusing on different kind of key areas of your system. So this one's specifically for retail. There's a session later on today for food and beverage, as well as one for membership and accounting as well. So if you think you might get more benefit from one of those, feel free. And there will be some crossover in case you've registered for multiple as well. There is a bit of crossover or some areas that kind of touch on different areas of the club as well. So you'll see some of that if you are attending more than one of those sessions today. So what to expect from our presentation this morning? You do have a chat box that's available to you. Feel free to use that chat box to ask any questions. We'll do our best to answer those questions as we go, or we'll catch you towards the tail end of today's presentation and address any of those questions at that point as well. Secondarily, we'll also go ahead and record the session, and we'll go ahead and post that within the Socio platform. So within the conference platform, you can come back usually a couple of hours after this session and review the recording there. You can also type in any questions or comments after this live session as well through there. Or we'll also post this on our YouTube channel, and I'll touch on the YouTube channel a little bit towards the end if that's something that you're not as familiar with. That being said, if you do run up on any questions after the live session today, like I mentioned, you can always come back to the session page in the agenda, ask your questions there, or alternatively, feel free to connect with either Greg or myself in the Socio platform, and we'll be on throughout the course of the next few days and the next few sessions, answering any questions that you might have within there as well. So a bit of an agenda on what exactly we'll be covering today. So we're going to run through all of your kind of core retail modules, what some key considerations are with regards to saving any historical reports that you might have. We'll dig a little bit deeper on the point of sale system, talk about partitions. We'll also touch on the inventory module, talk a bit about banquet and catering and jam events. As well as, like I mentioned, some of those more kind of secondary concepts that you might be responsible for at your club or someone else might be, but you might want to be working with them a little bit more closely on to help maintain as well, such as the Timekeeper system, users, maintaining the T-sheet, as well as some of the jam modules. And then what we'll do to wrap up this morning's session is we'll also jump into some of the help resources. So Greg and I are always more than happy to share as much knowledge as we can with you, but there is so much more out there, and in an effort to provide you with as much information and how to find that information in your Jonas system, we'll spend a few moments just kind of covering off where exactly you can go to get a little bit more help within the product. So with that being said, I'm just going to pass it over to Greg here. Greg, take it away.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we'll start here on the point of sale side, and we'll talk about how to best clean up your system. Now, depending on how you want to clean up your system, generally speaking, there's two ways. You can either, well, there's a couple ways, but you can either delete some old unused sales items, or you can deactivate your items and SKUs. And if you're planning on deleting things out of Jonas, if that's the route you want to go, just like it says in the middle of the screen, deleting things from Jonas tends to get rid of a lot of the sales history. Or I guess more accurately speaking, the system rolls up the sales information for one deleted item into one item per category. So there's really not a huge amount of reporting you can do if you want to start deleting things from the system. But if that's the route you want to go, we have a couple sales reports that you're going to want to run. That's up on the screen right now. So I would, I believe we have a PDF version of this presentation, Jeremy, that we're sending out to everybody. So you will have a copy of all these reports that you see up on the screen. But if you want to delete things out of Jonas, these are the reports I would run if you want to go back and take a look at that old sales information further down the line. So let's move on here. Let's talk about a few point of sale best practices. So I'll tackle the first 2 points first, and then we'll go on to the other options. So number one, never overwrite a description for a new item. Always try to create a new one. And number two, use the same item as much as possible. Don't duplicate your items unnecessarily. So these 2 points, I'll go over into Jonas here, and I'll give you a little bit more information on them. So the first one was never overwrite a description. Always create a new item. So what I mean by that is if I go into my list of items here, and that's under point of sale system setup and sales items. A lot of times what I see from clubs is, let's say my Pro V1 items right here, I'm not using Pro V1s anymore. I'm going to sell something else instead. What I see a lot of clubs do is they would go into that item, they would backspace the description, and then they'll say, okay, I'll put a Callaway Chrome Soft in there instead. And so we'll just overwrite the descriptions and use that item. And technically you could do that in Jonas, but we would always highly recommend against doing that. Just because even though you overwrite that description, a lot of the sales reporting and all of the reporting basically is attached to the sales item number instead. So even though I just created my new item here, I just replaced the descriptions. If I were to run a sales report on this item, I would have a whole bunch of sales behind this item, even though I just created it. So reporting wise, it's going to be a little messy to try to figure out what happened there. I would always just create a new sales item if you're going to actually add a new sales item to your system. And later on, we'll go over how to clean up your system. So creating all those new sales items won't be an issue, or shouldn't be an issue. The other one that we talk about sometimes is creating duplicate items unnecessarily and how we can avoid doing that. A lot of times what I find in Jonas is the reason why people create duplicate items within the system, and maybe this is more so a food and beverage thing, but it would apply to everybody. Number one is a lot of people don't really know their codes within Jonas. And I'll touch on this a little bit more in just a couple minutes here, but for me, I know all of my golf balls have the sales item number or the SKU number starting with 100. Okay, all of my items that start with 160 in the sales item number, those are all my golf clubs. And if I didn't know what those codes were, if I had no idea what this coding system was and what it meant, then I would just maybe put in a whole bunch of random letters and numbers, and then that's my new code, in which case down the line, you're going to have 5 different sets of AP2s, and you'll just have a whole bunch of duplicate items. So try to be very familiar with your codes. But also what I find sometimes, and again, this is more so on the food and beverage side, a lot of people don't know about this special pricing tab right here. So it won't really apply to me here because I only have one area in my golf shop. But if you do have a different price for this item, depending on which area you sell it in, so let's say it's $11 normally, this item, I can go into special pricing, and then I can say for each sales area that I have at my club, I can have a different price depending on which sales area I sell it in. Okay. So let's go back to our PowerPoint here. The next couple things are, number one, use abbreviations and be consistent. So if you're using the inventory side of Jonas for your wines and your alcohol and liquor, For glasses, like a glass of wine, I have an abbreviation of GLS. For bottles, I have BTL, and that will be consistent across my entire database. All my glasses will use GLS, all my bottles will have BTL, and more on that, they'll both be at the beginning of the description as well. So GLS would always be at the beginning, whereas I know some clubs put GLS at the end, some at the beginning. So try to be as consistent as possible. And then I already sort of touched on this, but learn your codes and once again, be consistent. Okay, so for more the food and beverage side, my appetizers all start with APP with the code. Entrees are ENT. Okay, for more review on the retail side, like we saw a little bit earlier, golf balls for me start with 100, golf clubs are 160. And I know that, and that makes it really easy for me to go in my list and find those items I'm looking for. Okay, a little bit later, we're going to go over how you can change up those codes a little bit if you want to change them up. I know what a lot of people do is if they come to a new club and you're taking over somebody else's Jonas or somebody else's shop, you may not be familiar with those codes. It is possible to recode your items and code them however you'd like them to look. All right, so we'll get into that in just a minute. And these next 3 points we're going to come back to in a little bit as well. So use color to group like items on your menus, makes it much easier for your staff. Hide buttons that are empty. And then we'll get into this one right now. Create a habit of inactivating items and removing them from your menus. So that brings up a really good point. Deactivating or inactivating items. What does that mean? Let's talk a little bit about that. So depending on how you want to clean up your system, you can deactivate or you can delete things from Jonas. And once again, since it is very important, I included this description one more time. The very first little paragraph that it says there, when you delete something from Jonas, whether it's an item or a SKU, it rolls up all the sales information for that one item into one item per category. So there's very, very little reporting you can do after you delete something from Jonas. So be careful with that. Usually what we recommend instead is for you to deactivate items. So I'm going to switch over into my Jonas, but we'll take a look at each one of these points. I'll show you a good report. It's called the list of inactive sales items. I'll show you that. That'll give you a list of all your items that you haven't sold or that you would or probably should deactivate. Then we'll look at how to deactivate, how to delete, and then how Jonas can tell you which of those deactivated items are still on your menus, because we're going to want to take those off. So let's go into Jonas here and we'll take a look at all of those options. So before you start deleting or deactivating things from Jonas, you may want to run this one report, and it's under point of sale, sales and revenue reports. And it's right near the bottom here, it's called the list of inactive sales items. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. If you have partitions, you just need to choose your partition at the beginning. And then whatever date range you input in here, Jonas will show you all of your inactive or all of your unused sales items within that date range. So for me, I'm going to go back to, let's say 2019, all the way up till, let's say today's date. And I'm going to go ahead and print and view this report. Okay, so any items that I haven't sold within that date from 2019 right up until today's date, this report is going to give me that information. So here is my report. Let me just bring it over from my other screen here. Okay, so all of these items that I see in my list, I have not sold since January 2019. And of course, if you haven't sold it since then, I mean, it's up to your discretion, but for me, I would say, let's go ahead and get rid of these items in here. I haven't sold them in 2 years, probably not selling them very much anymore. So let's go ahead and deactivate these. Okay, so go ahead and run that one on your side. And once you have that report, then what you can do is we have 2 options for how you can delete or rather deactivate your items. So if there's just a few things that you'd like to deactivate in your system, it's very easy. I'm going to use my Pro V1s as my example here. So I'll click into that one item. And then you have a deactivate item flag right here. So you just need to click on that. You might get this pop-up here. This is saying that this sales item is currently on 3 of my different menus. So I'll want to remember that and take that off of my menus, but I'll show you a little bit of an easier way to get that information later. And then this is saying that this sales item is currently linked to a SKU as well. Do you want to deactivate that? You'd pretty much always say yes to this. And now that I deactivated that item, it is no longer in my list. So just a really easy, simple way of you cleaning up your list a little bit, getting rid of all those old or unused sales items. Now, the benefit of deactivating an item versus deleting it is I can always bring that item back if I wanted to. So if I decide I'm going to sell my Pro V1s again, we're back with Titleist. What I can do is I can use the F10 button, just like it says right there, to search for inactive items. So I'll hit F10. Here's a list of all my deactivated items. And if I want to bring this one back, I can re-click on that flag and it'll say, do you want to reactivate the SKU as well? You say yes to that. And then now in my list, my Pro V1s are back for me. Okay. Now, when it comes to deactivating items, the only downside of doing it this way rather than deleting something is when you deactivate an item, it does still use that sales item number. So my Pro V1s, when I deactivated those, I can't then reuse 100,001. That item is still in use, even though it's deactivated. So that's really the only kind of downside of that. If you were deactivating your items and then also creating new items, I would continue on with that coding method. I wouldn't go back and try to reuse sales item numbers.
So Greg, we got a great question from Julie up on the screen. The report that you showed for inactive items, would this report show newly created items that haven't been sold yet? And if so, how do we eliminate them?
Good question. So for that one, I'm just going to show you, and I'm sure Jeremy will get into this in a little bit later, but I'm going to hit the F1 button on my keyboard. At this point, I'm assuming I'm assuming I'm a client, and I'm not really sure if this report shows me those items that I just created. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the F1 button for this report, which brings up our little help guide. And so it says this program allows you to print a report showing inactive sales items, and in brackets, it says not sold. So it will show you all the items that you have not sold for whatever date range you choose in there. So that does include all of the items that you haven't sold yet, or all the new items that you haven't created. So is that okay? Does that answer the question?
I'll let you know, Greg.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what we just saw there was how to deactivate your sales items if you want to deactivate them. Now, deleting them, you can always delete your items here as well. You might get a couple messages if you try to delete something in Jonas, just like this one. Currently, it's attached to a few golfer reservations. So there's a few things that might be attached to these items if you want to delete them. So you may just have to refer to that pop-up message that comes up on your screen. But what I'll show you next is how you can delete and deactivate items en masse. Because I'm sure going one by one and deactivating each of these items one at a time, that's very tedious. I don't want anybody out there to start doing that. So what we can do instead is we're going to go to point of sale, system administration, and then in here we have the change item deactivate status program. So I'll leave that visible so you can see where I am in the background there. But in this screen, all you're going to do is you're going to say set the deactivate status to yes, right there. And now all you need to do is click on all the items that you want to deactivate. So you can use that report that I showed everybody at the very beginning, your list of deactivated items. You can use that and click on all the ones you want to get rid of. The control and the shift buttons on your keyboard, those work in this screen as well. If you want to highlight a range of items, you can do that and bring all those over. Or what I always recommend to people, especially if you're new at your club and you're just kind of taking over an existing database, a really easy way to do a full cleanup of your system is to use this field right here. The date last sold before field. So depending on what date you put in here, I'll just go back to 2020. I'll do 1 year ago, March 15, 2020. whatever date you input in there, Jonas will show you all of the items that you have not sold since that date. So all these items here that I see on my screen, I haven't sold in 1 year. And for me, that is good enough to go ahead and deactivate all of these items. So I'm going to go ahead and move all those over. Okay, so for what you put there for the date range, that's completely up to you. I just did 1 year, but we all know 2020 is been a little different, so you might need to go back a little bit further. But that's a really quick, easy way of deactivating a whole bunch of items all at once. And then all you need to do is preview and then update this report, and that will deactivate them. So that's one really good option for you. Now, when you talk about deleting sales items, you can do that en masse as well. You don't have to go one by one, and we do have a program for that. So very, very similar look and similar function. But again, deleting things out of Jonas, it doesn't necessarily get rid of the sales history, but it makes it much more difficult to report off of it. So be very careful if you're looking to delete something from Jonas. But all you do in here is just click on the items or highlight all the items that you want to delete, and then Jonas will delete them from your system. Okay, now this presentation today, being that it's for retail managers, I know a lot of people on the line have the inventory system in their program, in which case we have the exact same options for the inventory side of Jonas. So if you want to deactivate items one at a time, you're going to go into Club Inventory, Files, and set up Sku Numbers. And I'll go into my golf shop. And just like we saw before, let's say I'm not selling my Pro V1s anymore. I'll go ahead and deactivate this one. There's also a inactive flag right here in the Sku setup. So I can flip that to yes. It's going to give me a very similar pop-up. Right now, this item is currently on 3 of my menus. Okay, do I want to deactivate the point of sale item as well? I'll say yes to that. And now my Pro V1s are deactivated. All right, and just like we saw before, if you want to bring those back, you do have a little toggle button down here. You can always click on that, and that will show you a list of your deactivated SKUs. So we can always bring this one back. I'll say, no, it's not inactive. I'm going to reactivate the point of sale item as well. And now it's back in my list. Okay, so whether you're on the point of sale side or the inventory side of Jonas, there is a way that you can deactivate SKUs one by one, or you can do it en masse. On the inventory side, it's under the utility section, and we have a change SKU inactive status program. And this works exactly the same way as the one in the point of sale side. So you're going to flip that inactive status to yes. You can use that date last sold before field if you'd like, and then you just click on all the items that you want to deactivate. Okay, then just hit preview and update whenever you're ready. Now, a little while ago, I mentioned if you're inheriting a system that was already created for you, and you're looking to recode or renumber your sales items, there is a way that you can do that. There's a program for that as well. And that is right here, change Sku Numbers. So sometimes this is what we recommend to clubs if they don't want to create a new partition, which I'll get into in a minute, or if they're not looking to do a cleanup of their SKUs, they just want to recode it so that the codes make sense to them. You can't always run this program. So in here, you'll choose your inventory area. And then, oops, yeah, it looks like I have a snapshot on file. So make sure you don't do this when you're in the middle of an inventory count. That's my one pro tip for the day. Let me just delete that snapshot. So let's go back in here into change Sku Numbers. And so all you need to do in here is you can go one by one and you can choose an existing SKU. Let's say that Pro V1 item. You can change the SKU number. Always try to maintain 6 characters in here, but you can go 100, 099 if I want. Hit enter, and then I can recode my items like that. So it's going from this SKU number to that SKU number, and I can always recode things. And if this is what you want to do in your system, you could always go into the import SKUs section, take a look at the specs here, and you can do an upload for this. So as long as you have an Excel spreadsheet with your existing Sku numbers and the Sku numbers that you want to change them to, you can always upload that right in, and you can change all the codes for all of your Skus if you'd like. Okay, so before we go back to the PowerPoint here, let me show you one more thing in terms of cleaning up your system, and that is a report that will show us all of our sales items and what menus they're on, specifically the deactivated items. So this report, it's called an F9 report. If you haven't heard of these before, they're very common anytime you get a list in Jonas. So whether it's your sales items, your members, your suppliers, anytime you get a list like this in Jonas, if you hit the F9 button on your keyboard, which I'll do right now, what you can do at that point is you can run an F9 report generator and you can create your own report. But what I'm going to use it for today, I'm not going to run that report generator. I'm going to run the very first option here, which is item list showing menus. So I'm going to click on this. And as soon as I hit view, it's going to ask me, do I want to run this for my active items only, deactivated items only, or both? So being that I just deactivated a few items in my system, I'm going to run this report to show me all those deactivated items and what menus they're on. So I'll click into that. Here is my report. Okay, and it looks like I have one item here, TaylorMade TP5 golf balls, that is deactivated, and it's on two of my menus right now, the golf balls menu and my main menu. So with that in mind, now that I know that, I can go into those menus, get rid of it off of that menu, and free up a couple buttons in there. Okay. So let's go back to our PowerPoint here. That should be all you need to know to deactivate or delete your Skus and items from Jonas. Let me know if there's any questions out there. Send the comments in. But now that we know how to do that, let's talk a little bit about our menu design. Just like it says at the beginning of this slide here, having clean menus can make things much more efficient for your staff, and I couldn't agree with that more. Up on your screen, we have a sample menu design here. It's very straightforward, very intuitive. You can see all of my bottles, cans, and draft beers. They all have different colors. There's a label at the top of that column. Very easy for my staff to understand that menu. Actually, you know what? I'm going to show it right now. But here is an example of a couple good menus and a couple really bad menus that you're going to want to avoid. So on the left-hand side, you can see, again, everything is color-coded by brands, which is the way I want it to be viewed. On the right-hand side, nothing is color-coded. Everything's just random. Definitely don't do that to your menus. But it's all the little things on here. It's the unused buttons that don't have anything in them. On the left-hand side, those buttons are completely removed, and it makes it look, in my opinion, much cleaner, much more friendly to your eye. In the middle, they didn't really do that. There's nothing wrong with that menu per se, but I think it pales in comparison to the one on the left. So how can you start making your menus more efficient? Number one, just like we saw in these menu options here, group similar menu items by color and titles, remove or hide unused buttons, and then utilize item lookups and item lookups by category as well. Okay, so let's go into Jonas and we'll take a look at all these, including your menu tabs and your toolbar. We'll take a look at that as well. So in Jonas, to edit your menus, you're going to go into point of sale, system setup, and then we have the quick setup menu design. And for this one, I'll just go into my golf balls menu for our example. Okay, so right off the bat, the one thing that I'm not a huge fan of, but it's completely personal preference here. All of these blue buttons here are unused. There's no items, and they're still there on my menu. They're a bunch of just blank buttons. What I always like to do is under the functions box here, if you type into the search the word hidden, or if you just type the H keyboard or the H button on your keyboard, that'll bring it to the hidden function. And for my personal preference, I always like to just hide these buttons altogether. Okay, I think that looks a lot cleaner doing it this way. I think that's a little bit more friendly to your eye. So I'll leave that up to everybody out there. You can certainly hide all those buttons that you're not using. For me, everything is color coded, and it should be pretty easy to do that on your side. You just need to choose the color that you'd like to use. Let's say purple, and then click on all the buttons that you want to change the color for. So pretty straightforward there. But I know one function that a lot of people are changing up their menus for, and a lot of new clubs are using this pretty heavily for their menu designs, is this display order menu tabs. If you haven't seen this before, this is a really good option for you, especially if you're struggling for room on your menus. Okay, so one of the big reasons why I'm struggling for room here is because I have a couple buttons taken up for links to other menus. Okay, and on your main screen, your main menu, I'm sure you're running into this issue as well. This is pretty valuable space here. I'm taking up a full button for a link to my clubs menu, a full button for a link to my gloves menu. Technically, you can get rid of all of those links to other menus. And the reason why I say that is if we go into this display order menu tabs, I'm going to hit the little test button so you can see how this works. But this is pretty similar to what my menu is going to look like on the actual point of sale. And the reason why I said you can get rid of this link to your clubs menu and your gloves menu is because you can add these tabs up at the top of your screen, and they will show up there by default anytime you go into your golf balls menu. So for me, as soon as I go in here, I can always just use these tabs up at the top. I can go to my clubs menu, I can go to my gloves menu, and I can just use those tabs up there rather than taking up precious space on the actual menu. So that is, again, personal preference, whatever you prefer. If your staff members love the links on the menu, by all means use that. If not, you do have that display order menu tabs over there. And then one of the functions that I mentioned was the item lookup button. I'm sure most of you on the retail side are very, very familiar with item lookups. All that does is it just brings up a list of all your items, in which case you can do a search for those items and you can look for whatever you want to look for. Okay, very similar to this box up here. I can kind of scroll through this box and try to find the items that I'm looking for. But what a lot of people don't know about that item lookup button is you can make it category specific. So for me, I use the exact same function. Both of these are item lookups, but I rename this to a golf ball lookup. And then right here, I specified just one specific sales category. Okay, so whatever category you want there, I chose my golf balls. But now when I click on this button, it will only show me a list of my golf balls and that's it. Nothing else. I don't have to filter through all those other items. It just shows me the one category. So you can have a few of those buttons if you want. You can do a golf ball lookup, golf club lookup, whatever you prefer. It could be a little bit more efficient, a little faster than just one regular item lookup button. Okay, so let's go back into our PowerPoint here. Okay, and then back to those menu design examples. Once again, one or a couple menus here are using a bunch of blank buttons there. One has hidden buttons, one's color-coded, one's not. So obviously, the one on the left is the one to kind of emulate if you can. And then before I pass it off to Jeremy, I'll go over what partitions are and if a partition is right for you. So if you haven't heard of partitions before, what those are it's essentially a way of separating out your sales areas and completely separating them. So what I find a lot of clubs do is they would have a partition for food and beverage, and they would have a partition for their golf. And those two things will be completely separate within Jonas. Their item databases, their menus, totally separate, and they would never mix. So when you run a sales report for golf items, you're only going to see the golf revenue. Food and beverage, you're only going to see food and beverage. And what a lot of people do is over the years, when the system gets a little messy, you've had a few different managers, few different owners go through the club. It's at a point, it's a little bit inevitable that there's going to be duplicate items and the system's going to get a little junked up, for a lack of a better term. So what a lot of people do is they create a new partition, in which case we can take what you currently have in your system, take all the sales items that you want to keep, and we can upload that right into your new partition, in which case you can start from scratch and you can start fresh. A new partition allows you to fully clean up your system. It allows you to redesign your system for your shop right now, not for whoever set Jonas up 15 years ago at your club. So a new partition is just like it says there, it's a truly clean system. You can design it for yourself and your operation. You can recode all of your items, recreate your menus, totally up to you. But that being said, it does require a bit of a work and time commitment. So I probably wouldn't do it during your busy season. And then it should be done with the help of a Jonas implementation specialist. If you don't want to go that route, you could do just a full system cleanup instead. In which case, just like it says on your screen, it's very easy to do a cleanup. It's very fast, and you can do it on your own. Following the slides that we saw earlier, you can certainly do a cleanup right now if you'd like. But when you deactivate items, just like we saw earlier, your system isn't truly clean per se. So those sales item numbers will still be in use, and you'll have to continue on the numbering system. But a cleanup is always an option for you, and it's always available. So with that being said, let me pass it back over to Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. So just kind of working off of the point of sale and the club inventory module, just to touch really briefly on banquet and catering for a moment. I know when you first think of banquet and catering, this might not be the most intuitive fit to a retail session, but some of the clubs on the phone or in our meeting today definitely use banquet and catering to manage golf events, tennis tournaments, things that would be, you know, outside of the typical four walls of what we would consider banquet and catering. So really just kind of highlighting here that just like with the point of sale system and just like with club inventory, you always have the opportunity to maintain those portions of your system as well. And as Greg has kind of mentioned, symptomatically, a lot of our clubs are challenged with just slow speed. It takes too long for me to run a report of historical events that I've done in banquet and catering. It takes me too long to even design or build my menus in point of sale because of the volume of items that Jonas has to load up. And a lot of what we're sharing with you today are really tools to help create some efficiencies in what the programs do and how they operate. And archiving that data, cleaning that data up, building a little bit more of borders or four walls around, you know, what information is relevant to today and what information is no longer relevant to the club, really helps Jonas create more efficiencies in how quickly it can pull that data up for you. So on the banquet and catering side, within the processing menu, there is an option here to transfer closed bookings to history. What we see at plenty of clubs is events that haven't been billed out or closed out for whatever reason, such as, you know, maybe internal events or committees where you're not necessarily billing for anything, but those events are still on the calendar or on the diary. We do have tools that are a little bit more involved that can be used as well to make sure that all of those get transferred over to history. But once you do transfer to history, clubs are always kind of concerned with what does that limit me with, or what information can I get when something is transferred to history versus not. For the most part, the reportings and the inquiry options that you have still remain intact. In a lot of the different menu options in Jonas, you will see a separate option for anything historical versus anything that's current or relevant information. So for the banquet and catering process, we have two transfers in here, one for closed bookings, one for open bookings. We, again, realize that many clubs have left a lot of events open throughout the years and might need some help cleaning that up. And then there is a separate menu option in banquet and catering for anything that's historical. So for example, historical bookings, for those of you familiar with banquet and catering, the calendar that pulls up is exactly the same as what we would refer to as the live calendar. So the user experience is the same, and there are some reports that are in here for you as well. And I affectionately call clubs hoarders. Most clubs don't like getting rid of information in their system, but there may come a point in time where you do want to purge data for whatever reason. So we always have both of those options available to you. So drawing analogy to what Greg shared with you earlier, with the option to inactivate or deactivate versus delete an item, in most of these different programs that we have in Jonas, we kind of give you something very similar. So the option to transfer to history, but that data is still there, and then inevitably the option to purge that data out completely from your Jonas system as well. So you've always got those two different options that are available to you. On the JAM event side, there isn't necessarily an archive feature per se, like we have in Banquet and Catering, but we do have the option to filter data out. So the best practice, regardless of which event booking tool you're using, both have the option that's available to you to go ahead and limit or restrict what information you have available. I'm just pulling up activity management here. But within the event list, for example, I'll use events as the option, very similar feature that's available within court booking, as well as appointments and the rest of the modules, is you always have the option here for a status filter. So if I wanted to go back in time and only view events with a certain status, so let's say I just wanted to see events that were completed, meaning events that I've billed out from my Jonas system, I can pull that as far back into history as I'd like, and then I can use that status filter to adequately display for me only the events that I'd like to see. So there isn't necessarily a clear-cut process on JAM events where I can say move everything from X date prior to history, but there is a way using what we refer to as filters, the ability to only view or zoom in on certain bits of information. On the user administration side, I know quite a few of you folks are either responsible for setting up your own new users in Jonas, or you work very closely with your systems administrator, your IT folks, to do this for you. And this is a really critical step. So I've worked with plenty of clubs along or through the years that have hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of users in your system. And I'm sure there are some of you right now that are shaking your head yes to this. And this really needs to become a better process, both from a system security perspective, but also just from an efficiency standpoint. If you do have users in your system that are no longer with the club, it should be part of whatever offboarding process you have. So just like when you onboard a new staff member, you know you have to come into this system, i.e. Jonas, and set them up as a user, and then set them up in your payroll system. The same process should apply for when you have staff that are departing the club as well. And really, just like the various other areas in Jonas, so I know Greg already touched on this with sales items and SKUs, very similar though. So when you come into your user management, user administration portal, if you do inactivate or deactivate a user, it's really a simple one-step process. There's an option here to deactivate the user. And then what we do, very similar to sales items and SKUs, is you've got what we call the toggle here in the lookup screen. So you can toggle back and forth between active and inactive users. So those users are still there for all intents and purposes. You've just removed them, A, from being able to log into your system, and B, from being shown up in any of the areas where you would be able to maintain what you would refer to as your active users. So great bit of functionality in there to kind of maintain or manage and view those two distinctly different type of users. A bit of a disclaimer on deleting users in Jonas. You want to be careful with which users you delete, especially for back office users. Deleting them does delete them out of some of the user event logs that we have in the system. So it isn't necessarily a best practice that we would suggest outside of deleting out and purging information throughout the various areas of your Jonas system. Moving on to Timekeepers. So for those of you, again, that are maintaining users, you'd probably be familiar with the Timekeeper system as well. Usually if you're setting up a new user, you're also setting up a Timekeeper staff member. Those two processes typically go hand in hand. And just like with With your users, there's a very similar process that's involved for Timekeeper staff as well. So firstly and foremost, on a week-to-week basis, you should be getting into the habit of transferring your time data to history. Depending on how you use Timekeeper, whether it's integrated to our payroll system or not, will determine how this process is handled. So if you're using our payroll system, the update to payroll will automatically transfer time data to history. For any of the clubs running Timekeeper separate from our payroll system, it should be a best practice for you folks to go in and transfer that data to your Timekeeper history area. And likewise with Timekeeper, there is also a purge option that's available for you as well. And last but not least, very similar with users, you do have Timekeeper staff, and as a best practice, if you're making the user inactive, you should be making that Timekeeper staff member inactive as well. Just like our discussion earlier about inventory SKUs and point of sale items, those two are very intimately linked together. The same way staff are linked, Timekeeper staff are linked to user accounts. The two are intimately tied to one another. So if you did try to go in and make a a user account inactive, it will remind you that that Timekeeper staff record should be made inactive as well. So the two are tied together. On the tea time management side, I find this is an area of the system that definitely needs a little bit more attention. So, clubs have a very large volume sometimes of tea sheet templates, as well as just open tea sheets that would need to be maintained. So I'm just highlighting a couple of areas here within the software, within this module specifically, that would be good to take a look at on a week-to-week and month-to-month basis. So for example, if I back out of here and I go into my tea time management module, first and foremost, there is a tea time end of day processing that we strongly recommend that clubs undertake. It doesn't necessarily have to be done day to day, for example, like your point of sale has to do. It doesn't have that same impact on the accounting side of Jonas, but it really does ensure that A, your tea sheets are being closed out, B, that any of your metrics and statistics within the tea time module are being adequately updated from week to week, and really just overall makes for a well-maintained system. So in a lot of clubs, you'll come into your tea time reservations module and you'll look back especially at historical periods and see a lot of open tea sheets, and that really just bogs down the system. More open days means more information that Jonas has to sort through because it thinks that it's still valid data. So if I go back to some clubs, 2, 3, 4 years ago, you still have open tea sheets. And although you might say, well, that happened 4 years ago, that isn't really relevant information. That isn't the way necessarily the software thinks it is. And it literally still thinks that it has to go back and check and populate that data for you. So as a best practice going into your system, at least once a week and going out and closing out all those tea sheets is a great process. And the other great feature here is the end of day report that actually populates with this is a fantastic level of detail for what the business looked like for that day on the course. The level of detail in there with regards to cancellations and no-shows, it really provides you a really nice view as to what happened that day on the tea sheet. So there's a couple of additional areas within here as well. Obviously, end of day is an important one, but maintaining your tea sheet is something that you may want to do as well. So within the processing menu, you do have the option in here for tea sheet maintenance as well. And as you can see, I'm not really practicing what I preach because I've got some tea sheets that are open here still from 2014. But again, this part of the system maintains itself as you're running the end of day. So if I were to run the end of day, these would automatically be closed out for me as well. So I would no longer have the opportunity to maintain those tea sheets. But for more relevant tea sheets, once they are opened and displayed in the back office as well as online, I can come in here and modify these tea sheets and the relevant templates as well. And then very similarly to Banquet and Catering, you do have the option in here to purge out data from your tea time management system as well. So we've had some clubs that have been using Jonas tea sheet for a very, very long time, and they want to clean up some of the volume of data that's in there. And you can go in there and go ahead and purge out this data, keeping in mind that any of the purge tools that we have would first require you to have run the T-sheet end of day. And some clubs might be thinking that might be a daunting process. I haven't closed out T-sheets in ages. So a couple of things here. Within the end of day processing, you don't necessarily have to run this day by day. There is a date range feature here that is available to you. So if you did have to run this for a good amount of time, you could do this in 1 month chunks or 3 month chunks and go ahead and close them out as well. So you don't necessarily have to do them day by day. If you do have an extensive amount of information in here, 5, 6, 10 years of data that's never been closed out, feel free to reach out to our support team. We do have some back-ended tools that we might be able to make available to you as well. But as a best practice, going forward from today, it is really a good idea to go ahead and close out your T-sheets on a day-to-day basis. Club inventory receipts is another area that I'll very briefly touch on here. So Club Inventory Receipts is a fantastic program that you may or may not be using. And this is literally the linkage between anything that you receive into your Club Inventory system to the Accounts Payable module. And it's a great matching tool where the Accounts Payable or Finance team can match what the staff at the shop have received into Jonas to what you're processing on the invoice. If this is a new feature or this is something new that you're just learning of right now, we've got some great videos on this topic online that are available to walk you through how to use Club Inventory Receipts, because it's a fantastic program that I'd highly encourage you to look at if you're not utilizing currently. But on the topic of maintenance of your system, there is a feature in here to transfer received invoices to history. So if you are using this module and you do have quite a volume of historical receipts, there is an option in here to go ahead and transfer all of that to history. There is a reversal option that's available to you in there as well. So if you did by accident transfer anything to history, there is a way to reverse that information out. So just like within various other areas in Jonas, you always have the receipt inquiry in here, but then we also have the history inquiry. So once you've transferred any of that data out, you have a separate set of inquiries that's available to you. And then within, or how to actually run that process is within the processing screen, and you do have the option here to transfer those Club Inventory Receipts to history. And what I meant by the option to undo there or reverse that entry, there's two options here. One is to move any current Club Inventory Receipts to history, and the other one is to move anything from history back to current. So in regards to some of the other JAM modules that we have, so for courts, class, spa, and appointments, very similar level of functionality that we kind of displayed for you with JAM events. So again, you have a fantastic set of filters that are available for you there. So if you did want to go back in history and see court bookings for the month of June 2020 or 2019, you can go back to that date range and then access that based on a filter. So only all bookings for that month that were checked in or checked out or no-showed, and use those sorts of filters to only access or zone in or zoom in on certain information that you would think would be relevant to you. So just to wrap things up, so a couple of points before I jump into the help documents. Everything that Greg and I covered is available for you within the documents section. So if you go back into your agenda for today's presentation and then scroll all the way down underneath Greg and I's picture, you will see a few documents that are in there for you. We've gone through quite a few different topics with you in pretty short order. There are videos that relate to quite a few of the different topics that we've touched on today. So one of the documents in there for you is a video resource where you can go through all the different videos that we have on a variety of the different system maintenance discussions that we're having. There's also a PDF copy of the slide deck in case you want to reference back to the materials that we've gone through with you today. And there's also a checklist that you can take back to your club. It's a fillable PDF form that kind of highlights all the different cleanup areas that you have or maintenance areas that you have in your Jonas system. And if you'd like, you can start using that as your club's kind of standard operating procedure to go through and maintain the various areas of your Jonas system. And we've kind of grouped them into tasks that are ad hoc, weekly tasks, monthly tasks, quarterly tasks, and annual tasks. And of course, not all of the different modules might apply to you, but it kind of gives you that framework of all the different areas in your Jonas system that you may want to maintain at different intervals. And there's links in there within the videos as well. So for example, if one of the tasks on there is to maintain your point of sale menus, we've linked a nice video in there that you can click on as well to kind of refresh your memory on how to go ahead and actually maintain your point of sale menus as well. So last but not least, just to kind of bring things home, help information. So there are lots of fantastic help tools within your Jonas system. I'm a huge fan of them, which is why I pretty much bring them up on any presentation that we do. And the first one is F1 Help. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but for every one person that I know that knows about this, there's usually one or two that doesn't. So I think it's worth the time to touch on it. Within your Jonas system, and Greg kind of showed this in the menu tree, but anywhere that you've got an option in Jonas, if you hit F1 on your keyboard, it will load up a web page for you with help documentation. So in the case of sales item, it literally walks through option by option for you, and what different options you have on that screen, what they do if you turn them on or if you infill data into that field, and really comprehensively walks you through all of the different options that you are presented with on the screen. So fantastic level of detail in there. F1 Help is available throughout the Jonas system for you, and definitely something that you should be taking advantage of. The other one is the report finder. We're running up against the clock here, and I want to make sure that all of you get to your next session, but I'll touch on this one briefly as well. So report finder, again, is inbuilt right into your Jonas system, right on your top toolbar, and really provides you with the ability to come through here and search for any reports that you have in your Jonas system. So I'm looking for covers here, or if I want information on, let's say, a margin report for margin analysis, I can click in on any one of those reports. It gives me a sample of what that report will look like. It explains to me how I'll run that report, and what I'll learn or what this report will really do for me. And the how to run section is really important because, as some of you folks might be aware, sometimes when you launch these reports, the program is asking you for quite a few different things. So the explanation there really helps you understand what information is mandatory, what information is optional or you can kind of skip over, and then you can literally click launch right there and go ahead and run that report right within your Jonas system. Couple more right before we have to run off. We do publish all of our release notes for Jonas as well right within the product. So if you did want to get up to date on what some of the newer features are in the version of Jonas you're on, within the administration option, you do have an extensive release notes library that you can always review. I'm a huge fan of the newsfeed toolbar as well, not necessarily just for the news that we publish in there because we email that to you folks as well, but there's a great favorites feature in there as well. So if you're on any menu option in Jonas and you hit the little heart in the top right-hand corner of your screen, that goes ahead and saves that to your favorites toolbar, and that's just there for you as one of the tabs on the screen. For those of you that are seasoned users, I like using this feature for the things that I don't have to access on a day-to-day basis, or those things that you're constantly scratching your head, or maybe you've got a little sticky note like me on your monitor reminding you of where to go look for something. I like using that favorites feature instead, because you typically know where to find the day-to-day stuff. You're in the product every day. Jam, equally fantastic help within each one of the modules that you have as well, so I'd highly encourage you to look at that. Jam also publishes its own enhancements and release notes as well, right built into the product. And the Jonas Support Knowledge Database is also a fantastic place to go and search for some of those documents as well. Some great how-to on some very, very granular or specific points that our support team is encountering when you folks are calling into us. We've got a fantastic series of boot camps as well, great for new staff. So if you've got new staff that are coming on board and need a really good overview and some training on a variety of different topics, Greg here runs a good majority of these boot camps, and we run them on a month-to-month basis. And videos. So if you log into youtube.com, search for Jonas Club Management, all the content from this user conference, as well as a fantastic array of how-to videos is available for you on our YouTube channel. Like and follow, because our digital education team is constantly publishing more information into there for you. And our LinkedIn group. So a very common question that we get from the implementation side is what do you see other clubs doing? How do other clubs handle a very similar process that we're doing here at our club? I love the LinkedIn group for this, because you've got well over 1,200 members from a variety of demographics of clubs that are constantly engaging and asking those sorts of questions as well. So if you're not a member of our LinkedIn group, go ahead and join it. And we've got tons of clubs there that are engaging day to day and asking those questions. And last but not least, Clubhouse Online. So Clubhouse Online has a very similar format for help documents as well. Fantastic array of knowledge base articles, videos, as well as educational webinars that are available for you as well. I'll wrap it up there by just leaving our Jonas support contact information up on the screen for you. There is one question that came through in the chat box about where are those documents. We did load them right at the beginning of today's session. So if you don't see them in your agenda option, just log out and log back in, and they should be available for you. And you can always come back to the platform and view a recording as well, just right under where you've attended today's session as well. So on behalf of Greg and I, thank you so much for attending this morning or afternoon, depending where in the world you are. Like I said, I know we're running right up against the hour here, but if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Connect with either Greg or I in the conference platform, and we'll get back to you with any other additional questions that you might have. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.